around the First Amendment. We have our guests to talk about this, the one and only Peter Coffin. Peter Coffin is a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore a world where profit is the driving force. And Peter, on these stories, you are the man I go to. How you doing, man? You doing all right today?
I'm doing good. I've been dealing with webcam issues. My webcam keeps making my computer crash, so I've plugged something else in here for now.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
That sucks.
My apologies for being a second here late.
Oh, dude, you're fine. I got a call from my first guest at 6:58, I believe, saying, "Hey, man, I can't make it today. Sorry."
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. And so I hope he's all right. He's in a rough area. He's in Beirut.
Oh.
It was supposed to be Lake Maruf. He's in Beirut. Israel has been doing bombings. The bombings have been getting further into Lebanon at this point. And for that matter, they have started to invade Syria that much more, taking more and more territory in Syria also.
Yeah, true.
So he pointed out, he said the Israelis are on the move. He said they are moving to a certain area and they're not going to have webcam in the area that he is moving to. So,
well, he had a much better excuse than I did.
Yeah, he did. He did. He did.
I just can't get my shit to work.
Yeah. Yeah, he's out there. Yeah, his life might be on the line. So yes, he had a better excuse. That's why I'm not raging about it. Usually I'd be raging about that stuff, but I try to give it a pass. Look, it's like I'm a person, right? And as a person, you have your own priorities. Even though you acknowledge that other people's priorities, but then it's going to supersede it, and maybe as a rule should supersede it just because it's their priorities. It's like that. It's their risk. So I get it. Still feels some kind of way.
Yeah.
Still feels some kind of way. I care about my stuff. I care about my show. And
well, it's a good show. So
I appreciate that, Peter. Thank you for that. Let's talk about the Global Engagement Center. So this is the center that the U.S. government under the Biden administration, was it under Biden or Obama? It might have been Obama. I think it was 2011.
Under Obama, it was established.
Yeah, 2011.
Yeah.
And so it had a $61 million budget, had 211 people. No, I'm sorry, established in 2016. 2016. The organization employed around 120 people, had an annual budget of $61 million, was established in 2016. Its stated goal was to recognize, understand, expose, and counter foreign and non-state propaganda and disinformation efforts. Now, the question, Peter, how do you do that? How do you do that? That's the question, right? How do you counter? Because look, I'll tell you this: in the UK, where they had that, what is it? It was Foreign Services thing or something like that. The UK government, and they ended up going after Jeremy Corbyn. So the government of the UK had an institution just like this, just like the Global Engagement Center, that they were paying, and it went after a candidate, the main candidate for Labour, calling the guy a Russian stooge, putting out like disinformation on Corbyn, and people were like, "What the F? How are you, the government, going after somebody in the government who's a leader of a major party in that same government? What the hell?"
Only that has like a reputation that is trusted among the population. Like,
yes,
it wasn't just that they were going after a person in the government. It was Jeremy Corbyn of all.
It was Jeremy Corbyn. And so you get this thing, Global Engagement Center, that does the same thing in many respects. I mean, the money that was putting up, the Republican Party has defunded it. So it's no money. So they're shutting its doors. Now, the reason the Republican Party is defunding it, because obviously they were going after people who were supporting Trump. And so on Twitter, it was Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of these things, Global Engagement Center were going out saying, "Hey, we don't like that this person said this. Can you take this down?" And they would give them reams of people to either get rid of, shadow ban, and they were doing this stuff for years, just working behind the scenes, whittling away. And when the Twitter files came out, that's when all of the stuff was exposed. I mean, just amazing. Give me your take on this. This is not a First Amendment violation.
Oh my God, it absolutely is. I mean, they would make the case that it is not, because it's not the government doing the censoring. But I don't believe in that. The United States is a capitalist country, and to be able to speak and have people hear it, and thus that's the reason to speak. You don't speak like, yes, you have the freedom of speech, not the freedom of reach. The freedom of reach is the freedom of speech, to be clear. Like, you don't talk to not be heard. You don't talk into a void and call that freedom. Like, that's, to be frank, freedom of reach equals freedom of speech, because speech is communication. So we don't have free speech, in my opinion. We have paid speech in this country. So that right off, that, like, it doesn't matter that it's a private company, but it's not a private company ultimately, like, initiating it. Like, it may be the private company doing it, but they're doing it essentially on orders from the state. So, I mean, in every possible way, it is a violation of the freedom of speech. Like, in my highly specific, I made a documentary about it way, it is it's a violation of freedom of speech. And in the traditional constitutional way, it is a violation of freedom of speech.
I mean, like, is there a way to do that? I mean, every time I hear countering disinformation, my first thought is, okay, so they're putting out propaganda and they're using quote unquote disinformation as an excuse. And then there's a question of, okay, well, is it even disinformation? I mean, the reality of it is what the government calls disinformation is just relative. It's oftentimes not something that's true or false. They just don't like it. I give you an example. Francisca Albanese, she won, I think it was like the United Nations Award, Best Person Award or something like that. So when she was brought up to that slimy Count Smirkula, God, what is his name? I can't think of his name.
I can't remember his name.
Miller, the sociopath. Matt Miller.
Yeah.
When he was brought up in State Department, basically he was answering questions, and she's an anti-Semite. Think about that. The woman is in the UN. Israel is running a genocide, and when she is going against the country for the genocide, using evidence, data, in order to make that case, where Matt Miller and the United States have effectively lied and downplayed data coming out of our own State Department saying they're starving the population. Matt Miller comes up, she's an anti-Semite. Now, from the government's point of view, she's putting out misinformation.
Yeah.
That's my point, right? Like, this stuff becomes so relative in the way that the government uses it. It just becomes a weapon for the government to silence critics. And that was my main issue with it. It's not like, they're going after things that are false. Yeah. And even if those things were false, there's still a question of whether or not the government should be doing some nonsense like this. But give me a take. Should the government even be doing this? Is there, does the government have an ethical responsibility to deal with disinformation? That's the question. And if the answer is yes, how do you do it?
Well, let's entertain the idea that the answer is yes. I think the answer is no, personally. But let's just for a moment talk about it as if that is something that we think the government should do. Is that a physical possibility? Because if we talk about what is true and what is false, what is provable and what's disprovable, what mechanism do we use in order to determine that? Okay, let's say academic studies. Now, here's the problem immediately, because academic studies are often funded by large companies who have agendas, or large lobbying organizations, even. I've tried to figure out, for instance, when the seed oil conversations first started kicking up, I spent a bunch of time trying to find unbiased research on that. It's not possible, whether it's on one side or the other. They're both agenda funded. There's some organization funding the research behind it, whether that is seed oils are bad, seed oils are good. Closest thing I could find to a reliable study was a Chinese study, and the Chinese study was run by the government of China about seed oils, and it found that seed oils were actually slightly better for you than margarine, for instance. So that was the closest I could find to finding the facts of the matter, because on one hand you had the international, I think it was something maybe nut organization. I can't remember what it was, but it had something. It had nut in the name and international in the name. That's all I can remember. But they had funded all of the pro seed oil stuff, and somebody else had funded all of the anti seed oil stuff. Or sorry, it was the other way around. They had funded the anti-seed oil stuff, and somebody else funded it. And it comes to, it doesn't really matter who funded it. The fact is that these lobbying organizations funded it. I don't believe anything out of any study that's funded by a lobbying organization, regardless of what I think of the subject. So, you know, what's the mechanism for proving disinformation? Like, we have to completely overhaul everything. Like, fact finding in the United States is too tied to money or too tied to the government. And like, what, you know,
Political objectives. Like, I give you another one, COVID.
Yeah.
So RFK was coming out and came out basically saying, look, man, some of the stuff they're saying about COVID is not true. And he would give his own take on it. That was true. And the government has him put in this kind of Twitter jail because they're working with Twitter in order to deal with anybody who's going against the government's narrative on COVID. And so he was like, they put him in this category of malinformation. And malinformation wasn't that it was false. It was just inconvenient. It's like, okay, I mean, what am I supposed to do with that? So now something that's true, but it's inconvenient also gets silenced. Like, or Ukraine, I'll give you another example, Ukraine war, where they would say, well, this was purely unprovoked. And any notion that it wasn't unprovoked is just disinformation. It's like, okay, sure. Like, I don't know the mechanism to deal with something like that, short of just countering speech with speech.
Yeah.
Don't lose credibility.
Really, that's the only thing that we can do. And unfortunately, like I mentioned a moment ago, speech it's, in my opinion, it's highly tied to both social capital and actual capital. Like, it's unfortunate, but like, we don't really have a free speech situation because the way that our country is set up, like, yes, the printing press did democratize speech to some extent, but you still need to have a printing press.
Yeah,
it's the same for the following technologies. But here, what we talk about, probably the best option is more speech, or you know. But the problem is, we don't have a system that's really set up to give each side a fair shake at proving their case.
Yeah.
If you mentioned COVID and the Ukraine war, I've been in Twitter jail a while. I would say back to about 2020, due to fun election related stuff. I don't see any evidence that I'm out of Twitter jail. So whatever I say on Ukraine, which I spent a long time on like showing people, like, okay, here's a reason why Ukraine would happen, and I talk about 2014 and that election situation, et cetera. So because that's very obviously like the preceding events that
they said that's propaganda, Peter.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly the problem. It's propaganda. I've been a bad guy, and you know what's really funny? I got into Twitter jail on like late November 2020, right after the votes had been counted. I just find that it's such a supremely interesting coincidence, in my opinion. Yeah. I had talked about how through the lead up of the election, I got a ton of engagement talking about how Biden isn't the answer, et cetera, et cetera. And then once the votes are counted, suddenly all of that engagement shuts off. I changed nothing. Suddenly all that engagement shut. I'm still in Twitter jail right now, even with Elon. But I don't think Elon likes me a whole lot either, if he knows who I am.
Oh, you've been trashing Elon. Look, man, Elon needs to shut that up.
I don't trash him in the way that other people trash him, but I also don't see him as infallible like a lot of other people do as well.
He's a billionaire who's looking out for his own interests. That's the way I see him. I mean, look, he bought Twitter for his own interests. It wasn't for this free speech. It wasn't for these high deals. It was the same reason that Bezos bought the Washington Post.
Oh my God! And if you want to talk about Bezos and the Washington Post, you talk about the scandals involving the unions. Like,
yes,
that's the funniest thing because, I mean, I'm sorry to go off in a different direction, but you can provably show that they were covering that differently than all the other outlets. Like, and then there was other things too, but that was the one that I remember right now.
Yeah. No, man, it's a wild thing when you think about it. I mean,
and they again paid speech. It's paid speech. They're the ones who get the quote unquote free speech, the ability to say what they want and have it be heard by people. And these are the only people who, in theory, would have the ability to counter mis or malinformation. And well, they obviously have their own agendas. So
yeah.
The problem of free speech is that if you have free speech, people can say things that are wrong or malicious or what have you. Like, we do have guardrails on stuff like saying fire in a movie theater or very, very obvious, like insightful behavior, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And I get that. That's fine. I don't have any problems with that. But the fact is, if you're going to do what they're calling freedom, you have to kind of be like, well, I guess propaganda from everyone is allowed. You know, you but can't just say like our propaganda is the only real propaganda. We're really talking the truth here.
I know, but that's why credibility matters. Yeah, like that's why, you know, when the government loses credibility, we're in a world of, you know, shit and piss. Yeah, I mean, same thing with media. When they lose credibility, okay, well, then where do people go? Like the moment that I think you're lying to me, I'm probably not going to listen to you. Or at the very least, I'm going to be very doubtful of what you're saying. And this is true for mainstream media across the board. I mean, when CNN is doing a propaganda piece for terrorists that have taken over a government and they are caught in what is clearly a staged thing, okay, then what are people supposed to think of that? Like, well, like, how do I suppose to regard seeing something like that and then come away with this assessment that, okay, they can be trusted and they're telling me they're the most trusted name in news, right? How do I deal with that? This is supposed to be the network that people go to get information about the world or what's happening in the United States. And you see that and you're like, okay, these people are just lying. Now I'm looking at other people, right? And so then people look at Alex Jones or people look at some of these other people who just make shit up because every so often they say something that's kind of vaguely true, but the people think, okay, well, maybe this guy is telling me the truth. Okay, well, only 20-30% of that is true. But he runs with the rest of it. But I guess my point is the only reason that people will go to those sources is because the credibility of either the government or the mainstream media has been so demolished that they're looking for something that is more accurate. At least that's my take.
I think the solution is that CNN needs to bring back Mufasa. That's I think that
that's the issue. If they do that,
I don't hear James Earl Jones' booming voice coming out and telling me that this is the most trusted name in news. That's the reason I don't trust it. It's certainly not everything you just said.
I wrote this article for Black Agenda Report, and I think the name of the article was "Life and Times of a Russian Propagandist," and I was kind of pointing out like how bizarre it was to work at Sputnik. And it's like you're doing stories from a worldwide perspective. So you're getting news from, you know, Press TV, RT, Sputnik, Washington Post, New York Times, Politico EU, like across the board. Like you're just looking at everywhere. Chinese news, like Global Times. And so your point of view is global. It's not like you're listening to the Washington Post and that's the only news you get. Yeah. And you realize, okay, these people are lying. And so you pointed out, okay, look, this idea that it's unprovoked is nonsense. The idea that Russia blew up his own pipeline is nonsense. You know, and you go piece by piece and you say, all of this stuff makes me a Russian propagandist, despite the fact that all of it's true. And it's like when you are in that world, it becomes a very weird place because it feels like, especially when the war first started, it feels like, okay, these people are lying in mass. Like they're just lying in mass. And every article that you look at, there's something dishonest. They are pushing a certain narrative and a point of view that they want the public to go with. I had never seen that. Like, I got to be honest, I had never seen that. I didn't realize it was that bad until seeing it from that point of view. And so when people say the news media have lost credibility to like 30% of people believe in it, I think they earned it. But I don't know how you get that back.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you get that back? I mean, because the government does have, like, I do, if I'm in the government, I do have an interest in ensuring that the public has correct information.
Yeah. I mean,
Providing, providing that it's in my best interest.
Yeah.
Which is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why I don't want government doing this nonsense.
Well, so I think you can really only come back from it by starting over. I don't think you can have everybody, like, for instance, we brought up the incident with CNN and that fake prisoner a minute ago. I don't think she can continue to work there, for one, and I don't think that this is probably a little more controversial. I think that Jake Tapper, for having covered it, whether it was his decision to do it or not, he can't work there either. Like, I'm sure that they told him he had to do that, but I mean, that's the face that they either trust or don't trust. You have to start over, and everybody has to, all of the new people have to be trustworthy. Like, they have to start from the ground up and do actual journalism. I just don't see how you get the trust back in any other way. I don't even know if that would work. Like, that's a basic, like, where do we start? You know?
I don't know, man. I think I am, like, I don't think they fully get the consequences of losing credibility.
Yeah,
I just don't.
Well, I've been talking about this with the Democrats too, because the thing I talked about for a long time up through the election, we've spoken about it many times. I talked about a crisis of credibility with the Democrats,
right?
And the reason why I said they probably won't take Biden out of the race, even though they were forced to. There's no option.
They ate him alive.
Yeah, they had to. There was absolutely no other option. But the thing is taking him out of the race wasn't an actual solution to the problem that they were having either. The problem was a problem of credibility. They'd established that they're willing to lie about Biden's cognitive ability, which to any person in the United States, it was obvious. Like, when you say the one word that describes America is blah, 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 blah. You can't. Nobody thinks that's a person operating in full capacity, you know.
Peter, man, I'm gonna have to end it here, but yeah, it's a good point. It's a credibility issue.
How do you come back? I don't think that you do.
Yeah, would you say you don't think you can come back from it? I don't know how they do either. But that is going to be an issue they're going to have to solve.
It's going to be wild.
Yeah. Dude, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. Merry Christmas, by the way.
Merry Christmas to you. Thank you very much for having me on, as usual.
Always, man. Peter Coffin, he's a journalist with over 250,000 YouTube subscribers, podcaster, and author. In their book, Custom Reality and You, they explore a world where profit is the driving force. You can follow Peter on YouTube and Twitter at Peter Coffin and purchase his books on Amazon.com. You have a great day, Peter, man. Thank you again for this.
You as well.